Okay, so really great to see everybody. Let's see, just for the record, today's December 8th, 2024, and it's with great joy and heartfelt gratitude that I want to welcome Larry Friedlander to speak today. I want to say just a little bit about my relationship with Larry because it's been so rich. Let's see, I met Larry in 1986. Let's see, I was in a drug treatment program in San Francisco, and Larry came and spoke. And, he's a very gifted speaker, and he kind of blew me away. But also, that was a really dark time in my life. And I remember after that I felt some hope. And then that was a kind of a novel sensation for me at the time. But it opened me to Larry. And then we've been friends for all these close to 40 years now. And I was thinking about how being a friend to somebody from the program was so very helpful for me. I mean, in one of the things was that, one of the things that sort of makes a 12-step program come alive is when you start to have friends and you feel like they understand you. So I felt that from Larry. And then also he took me to some meetings, and then I met some of his friends, and, suddenly I realized that I was surrounded by people that understood my experience. So that kind of emotional support and like being a safe space and also feeling accountable. I can remember like the first year I was clean and sober, I was having a lot of using dreams. And in a number of the dreams, I startled awake. I'd used in the dream and I startled awake. But in the dream, I was thinking, fuck, what am I going to tell Larry? That was like part of the dream.
Give me some. That's what I would say.
Then I was like, and then, this is a dream. But Larry, he modeled growth for me. I mean, he's a few years ahead of me, and, seeing him grow and change, and it gave me hope. And then because he was farther along in his recovery, and it inspired me. So all of those things like encouragement and affirmation and supporting me when I had challenges, which there's been plenty in the last, 4 decades. And then also just fun, like somebody to have fun with. Like Larry's hysterical, and every conversation I end up laughing my head off. So that kind of wisdom and sort of kindness like really shaped my spiritual journey. And then that's really made I can't say how valuable Larry's friendship has been to me. So really happy to have you here today, Larry. Thank you. You've been such a great friend. And Larry's going to talk today about, I think you're going to talk about how Buddhism can be a comfort when you have difficulties in your life. Does that sound accurate?
Sort of, yeah.
Okay, good. All right. And we'll take it from there. So,
you're really moving to hear you say that. And I want you to send me a transcript so I can use it on my next application for grant. Anyway, yeah, you're saying that reminds me of, I'm going to speak today about Dogen's talk on the world is a shining pearl. Which I'm really, I have a feel like I have a lot of chutzpah to talk about Zen Buddhism in front of all of you, when I only dabble in Zen, and I most probably make a lot of mistakes, but I'm drawn to thinking about Zen in time of crisis because I think Zen, of all the Buddhist schools, was born in crisis and is formed to help people in crisis. That is the governing energy behind Zen. And I just want to read something from Dogen's Pearl. He talks about the shining pearl, which is a sort of image of enlightenment, though it's complicated. That's what I want to talk about. But he says, when you are drunk, by which he means when you're in a state of ignorance or delusion, there will be a close friend who will give a pearl to you. and you must, without fail, give the same pearl to your close friend. So in there is a kind of encapsulated is the process of Buddhist enlightenment, which is the passing of the pearl from one person to the other, even though we're all drunk and we all don't know what we're doing. And the reason I'm thinking about this issue is that because of the election, I noticed my reactions, which were of shock and surprise, aggrieved, how could this happen? Who betrayed us? All those kind of things. And it was painful reaction. And I thought, well, maybe I should go and look at Buddhism because that's what Buddhism is for in times when I feel discombobulated in a difficult way. And I particularly wanted to look at Zen because Zen, like Buddhism, actually began out of crisis. And Sakyamuni Buddha was in a time in history when the small political states that he grew up in and that his father was a ruler of were being destroyed and overwhelmed by new urban culture, by violent empires that were just breaking everything down. And that the mythic story about Buddha, that he grew up in this wonderful isolated paradise and he went out and he had this shock when he saw the world was different from what he saw, is, I think, structurally a kind of attempt to shape our understanding of what happens in crisis, that we're all get enclosed in this little bubble of denial, thinking that the world we're in is totally stable. It's sort of like in San Francisco. I remember sitting outside a cafe in the 80s, and all of a sudden the floor beneath me started to shake. And then what the hell is going on? At that moment, you realize how dependent you are on your sense that certain things are stable. And like in America, we can think that our American democratic system is stable. We can depend on it. And like in a family, I can depend on my family so I can fight with my siblings because I have that sense that finally we're contained. And so that the original Buddhism is an attempt to reimagine all the foundations of your assumptions of the world. For Buddha, the current religious and cultural assumptions that came from the Vedic system and ritual sacrifice and all that sort of thing didn't work anymore. And Zen, though it started a few centuries before, was a kind of little brother to larger Buddhist groups. But during times of crisis in the Tang Dynasty in the 8th century, there was this terrible rebellion. And in the course of 10 years, like half the population died. There was famine, the capital was destroyed, and many of the Buddhist structures were destroyed. And then when Buddhism recovered again, a century later, you had an emperor who really hated the Buddhists and he burned all the temples, sent 500,000 monks back to their home and destroyed the Buddhist libraries. And out of this, Zen emerged as a kind of guerrilla movement. It didn't depend on fancy temples. It didn't depend on expensive scrolls or images or hierarchies. It was a small group, intimate movement that grew on itself out of the interpersonal connections of different people, masters and students. And so the message that Zen brought to that chaos was that instead of saying, as in a lot of important Buddhist traditions, that we just have to enjoy the world. The world is samsara. We need to like detach from it, renounce our passionate engagement in the world, keep to ourselves, learn to let go of desire and fear, and then with time, as our karma dissolves, we will emerge from this world off the wheel of existence and come into nirvana. What Zen said, picking up from strands in the Mahayana, was that there is no world to escape from. This is the only world. And in this world, what we have is a continuing mixture of samsara and nirvana, of enlightenment and delusion, that is inextricable to the world. There's no other place. There's no other place to go to. There's no other person to be. And this teaching involves not only a kind of intellectual understanding, it demands a really deep overturning of our relationship to experience. And that's what Dogen is playing with in this particular chapter. He chooses to talk about the shining pearl because his strategy is to take traditional Buddhist themes or memes or sayings and then relive them in a new way, opening up your mind and heart to a new way to look at the thing that you thought you already understood. And at the very beginning, he warns us that the way we ordinarily have of trying to figure things out doesn't work. So it begins kind of with what's really a koan, where he talks about how he was working with a student, a monk, and the monk said, "I hear you teach the entire universe is one bright pearl. How should we understand that? How should we express it?" The monk's question is a natural question. You're telling me that this world is a shining pearl, and I look out and I see horseshit, and I see famine, and I see cancer. Right? How do I understand that? And the teacher, the master, says the entire world is one bright pearl. What is there to interpret or understand? So the typical Zen answer that makes you want to kick him, right? It's like, that, what kind of answer is it? But for some reason, the monk seems satisfied with it. The next day, the teacher turns back to the monk and says, the entire universe is one bright pearl. How do you understand that? How do you express that? The monk replies, the entire universe is one bright pearl. What is there to understand? And the master says, you're totally off. You are at the lowest level of enlightenment. So he already sets up the problem that the way we imagine language or understanding is radically inadequate. What he is saying is that when I said that to you yesterday, we were in an intimate, specific situation with all kinds of interpersonal connections and karma flowing into this moment. And out of that moment, I said what I said. You are now repeating to me a day later when the situation is completely different, right? It's like when I teach class and I tell something in a lecture and people write it back to me, I think, oh, you get an A. But this semester says you just failed. You failed because the world is not a fact that you can point to. It's not a yes or no. It can't be, as he says, the one bright pearl expresses reality without actually naming it. It is the name of the universe. He says that if we want to get to the world, we have to become intimate with it in a situational way. We have to step deep into the world, into the currents that are at play at this moment, not try to express it, which means to step out of the situation and look at it and judge it, but to act within it, to act within it without any guidelines or former wisdoms. We have to act to it on the spot in an improvised way. So then he goes on to talk about the pearl, and he does what can make you very upset with Dogen is he tells you one thing. He starts off describing the pearl very much as a kind of image of nirvana, of the ineffable. The one pearl means that the universe is not bound by ideas of vast or minute, large or small, not square or round, not the center, nor liveliness, nor brightness. So he begins by saying, I'm really talking essentially about this ineffable thing. But then he goes on right away to disturb our assumption that we have the shining pearl here and we have this world here that we live in that's all broken and difficult. Because then he goes on to say the grass and the trees, the mountain and the valley, in other words, the world of particulars, of separate things, of suffering things, is the pearl. So that instead of our expectation that we have the goal here and then we have what has to be transcended here, we learn through the course of this discussion that what he means by the shining pearl is not either the shining pearl as nirvana or the world as samsara, but somehow the interconnection of those two. That the pearl is not a thing apart, but a pearl emerges from, in fact, the contradictions and the tensions within the world. That it's this, what one person said, it's the harmonious interplay of difference that is the heart of this insight. And when we read it, at first we say, well, I want him to explain why this is so. He just says this, then he says that. He says the pearl is life and death, and the pearl is not life and death. Thank you. Why? Why do I believe that, or what does it mean? Well, what it means is that the focus is not on those expressions of fact. The focus is on Dogen's masterly playing with those realities. What we learn from it is not what he's saying, yes or no. He's learning how to be in middle of contradiction and confusion and connection, right? And that the agility of Dogen's mind, the way he takes something that you expect and he turns it upside down and then he looks at it the other way and then he shocks you and surprises you, is the very essence of Zen teaching, which is to engage you in or put your focus not on what do I have to believe or how do I act, but how do I play with my life? How do I play with my reality? And because of this, there's a sense of an enormous optimism, even as he's talking about the difficult things. That he ends the chapter by saying that all of us, even the most deluded, even the ones of us who are what he calls in the black mountain cave of demons, sounds like the bathhouse I used to go to, that even there is the pearl, and even there you are being rescued. So I want to go to like one little thing he says to kind of help understand how it could be that I can be deluded and enlightened at the same time. He says, in order to have a 1 foot wave, it is necessary to have 1 foot of water. Then a 10-foot pearl can become a 10-foot brightness. No one really knows what this means, but I'm going to give you my take on it. When he speaks of the wave in water, he's referring to the fact, or to the way in which Buddhism talks of the Dharma as a huge ocean, and that enlightenment is being able to live in the very depths of the ocean, in the middle of the storms and the waves and the sun, at peace, to rest in that vast space, right, with ease. Now, personally, when I go to the shore, when I go to the beach, I like to swim, but when I jump in the ocean, I swim for about 15, 20 minutes and maybe get, 30 feet out. And then I feel that, my feet are very far away from the ground. Everything looks a little ominous. I turn around, I see the shore, and I think, well, I'm going to swim back. And I swim back. So I haven't been in the ocean of Dharma very long. But the fact that I was in the ocean, I had an absolute perfect experience of the ocean. I felt what it's like to the water pulling me. I felt its buoyancy. I felt the currents. I felt the salt in my mouth. I had an experience of the ocean that doesn't depend on how far I went or how deep I went. Right? I had a physical, perfect, engaged relationship to the ocean. So in some sense, what Dogen is trying to do is he's trying to like immerse you in the ocean, even if it's just for 10 feet. And that immersion allows you to feel the total weight and beauty of the Dharma. So, how much time do I have? 19 minutes. Okay, so how does this connect to crisis? I think the most important thing that I can learn from this is that in order to deal with this situation, I have to engage in it totally without separation. If I come to a situation with fear and anger, judging, how the hell did he do that? Why did he do that? Who is good? Who is bad? When I stand outside of it and look at it, it seems like impossible. And if I need to make a choice, I will tend to make the wrong choice. But if I am ready to be intimate with the situation, to go inside of it, so that I can feel all the intricate complexity of the situation. When you think of the election, for example, it's not simply the election. As Buddhism says, it springs from innumerable causes that go all the way back. The history of America, the history of Europe, the history of colonialism, all of that is happening. And everybody is being moved around like in an ocean by different currents. The people who vote for Trump are not one kind of person against the people who didn't. They are many, many, many different people coming to it with different reasons, being propelled by their karma. And in order to deal with that, I have to, first of all, step into the ocean completely and allow the situation to teach me. Another way of thinking about that is if you go to a football game, which I never do, but when you go to the game and you're a fan, you think, if my team wins, then it's going to be a good game. But my team loses, it's a bad game. But if you're actually in the game, the point of the game is not that one person loses. The point is that there's two things moving against each other and going back and forth in a kind of rhythm of giving and taking that is the game. And that if one team suddenly decided not to play, the other team wouldn't win. There would be no game, right? And we're in a game, right? And the thing we need to do is not step out of the game, but as Dogen says, when you're in it, the very forces of contradiction are also the forces of liberation. The energy in which these two different things are backing each other is also the space in which something new can happen, with some liberating thing, so that out of the chaos of the Chinese world in the 8th and 9th century comes a really radical and brilliant reimagining of the Buddhist tradition and reimagining of how human beings can get along. So just want to close with a quote from Theodor Adorno, who is a German philosopher, Jewish, who had to escape from the Nazis. And he wrote a lot about living in terrible crisis. And he says that the world is out of joint, is shown everywhere in the fact that however a problem is solved, the solution is false. That when you try to solve something and find a solution that you could hold on, it's always off in some way. It never fully answers the situation. The situation changing moment by moment, second by second, cannot be solved. It can only be experienced. And finally, it can only be experienced, as you see in Zen and in Dogen's writings, with a sense of lightness, of play, of humor, because all those things break up our immediate tendency to solidify, to hold on, to build. We have to constantly deconstruct all of that and deconstruct it in a spirit of faith and hope and merriment. And so I think for me, it's been very important to let go of trying to figure out the crisis, let go of feeling personally offended by it all, and try to just sit in the situation and then see what presents itself. Okay, I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Shall we sit for 5 or 10 minutes, couple minutes, and then gather ourselves, and then we'll have some question and answer.